1935, this black choking...
The Dust Bowl. Some scientists believe that drought and sunspots go together.
Two, one. Good afternoon, stations. This is the Executive Chamber Video Information Service news feed for Monday, June 15, 1981. Governor Hugh Carey traveled to Grossingers, New York today to address the annual meeting of the State Conference of Mayors. We will begin our feed with cutaways of the conference room where the meeting took place. That is followed by the governor's arrival and then a portion of the governor's speech for Sound Up Full. Closing out the feed is a question and answer session at about 14 minutes in, also for Sound Up Full, and finally cutaway shots of the governor. Our feed begins momentarily, so please keep your tapes rolling.
Continually animated.
Thank you, Mayor White.
And that'll work out, will solve the problems with him. So they passed the necessary resolution at the village board meeting,
We are pleased to welcome this distinguished guest who has come to speak to us this morning. He is a person dedicated as we are to serving the public to the best of our ability. Fellow mayors, local officials, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to present to you the governor of the great state of New York, Mr. and Mrs. Hugh L. Carey.
Thank you very much,
Mayor White and Mrs. Mayor White. So, Mayor, that introduction may have been both Freudian and prophetic. You said that Governor and Mrs. U.L. Carey, so I trust you know to whom he's referring. It's Evangeline on my left, Mrs. Carey. We are here this morning making the best of circumstances. When you come up from the haze and fog of most eastern part of our state and land in the similar haze of the Catskills, you appreciate the third wave of technology that got you in the helicopter from one place to the other. The third wave of technology, however, hasn't quite hit the plumbing system, little house we have out in Suffolk County, where Evangeline found out that she was third online for the hot water, the trickle that it was. And we assure you, though, we're cleansed and delighted to be here today. And I trust you're all acquainted with the old tests that, and many of them, that people use to distinguish optimists from pessimists. It's when you're either halfway up a ladder or halfway down the ladder, or the fellow at second base is halfway home or sitting there inevitably going to be put out, or in my case where you're just a little past halfway to 100 or feeling younger than ever because the worst is behind you. Today I'd like to apply those kind of tests to the legislative program that we're pursuing in Albany and suggest that despite some delays and disappointments, despite some harsh words and some partisan infighting, our future is quite bright and we're more than halfway home in rebuilding this state. First of all, this year's budget, the budget that was adopted and passed, provides some major increases in aid for human development programs of critical importance to cities and villages across this state. A bipartisan 15% increase in the state's basic welfare grant was approved, will become effective on July 1st. Someone back there, good-looking lady shaking her head about being bipartisan. Oh, yeah, it was bipartisan. Sponsored by Senator Anderson, passed in his House first, and then adopted by the Democratic Assembly. That's real bipartisanship. The $50 million program for improvements in the police and court system was passed with a $20 million commitment this fiscal year. In this same area, we are now close to agreement on a $475 million bond program for corrections and law enforcement, strengthening our criminal justice system, and for the construction and rehab of badly needed prison space. This year, we will provide $4.1 billion to the state's 706 local school districts, an increase of $287 million over last year. Well, when you marry a teacher, you better be good to education. For our cities, in addition to established programs, we provided $28 million in the municipal overburden program, $32 million in special city aid, and $79 million in direct aid to be distributed on the basis of need. Now, among this distinguished group, mayors, heads of villages, towns, I'm waiting to hear from you in an organized fashion as you desire to have this money. It meets all your criteria. It's based on need. It singles out those cities that have reached limits and can't help. And your group has been somewhat silent on a position on this aid. So before I leave here today, and you want to ask some questions, maybe someone can answer that on behalf of the group. But even with all these increases in aid, we in New York have managed to keep the growth in state spending below the rate of inflation and to continue the tax reduction program that's been a major underpinning of our economic recovery in this state. This year, in fact, we've expanded this program, and you know it. In addition to the $2.3 billion tax reduction already in effect, we will reduce taxes for individuals and businesses by $75 million the 1981-82 fiscal year, leading to $299 million in reductions in 1983 and 1984. Now, mayors like Paul Lattimore and Steve Carlson, leading economic redevelopment, Auburn, Jamestown, they know how important it is to give that signal to business to keep them moving in, keep them expanding the labor force in these growth communities that used to be in decline. In addition, all pension income up to $20,000 will be exempt from personal income tax beginning in 1982. And homeowners with incomes under $16,000 will be given further circuit breaker credits. We will exempt new businesses that have few profits in their first 2 years of operation from a form of corporate franchise tax based on their capital. The stimulation of little business, small business especially, because that generates more than half of the new jobs in our state. We will increase the state's exclusion of capital gains income to 60% from the current 50%. We will grant a tax credit and accelerated depreciation for investment in research and development carried out in New York State. What great news it was. Mr. Lowe, the former head of the NASA space program, now head of RPI, announced that enormous development in East Greenbush, New York, will herald a great new center of high technology in our state. And someone said they're going to refer to it as the Palo Alto of the East. But no, they'll refer to MIT as the capital and Albany area and Rensselaer of the Massachusetts. We're making headway on that front as well. Now, these programs do not rest merely on hope, or perhaps superstition is the better word, that a massive and diffuse tax cut will restore the productivity of our industries and spur investment. Rather, it is based on the success that we've had in reversing the state's economic decline through a series of carefully targeted tax cuts that are specifically directed at creating investment and encouraging business development. In conjunction with programs of deregulation and regulatory reform, these tax cuts have helped us create 375,000 new jobs and permitted us to weather the most recent recession better than any of our neighbors. Since January then, I have submitted 155 program bills to the legislature. These bills embody the wide-ranging program for economic growth and social development I laid out in my State of the State message and the State of the Health message and my special economic message. 1/3 of these bills were introduced by the beginning of March, and all but a few of the remainder were sent by the beginning of April. These programs, of course, represent a crucial test for the future of New York, calling for the state to assume the entire local share of Medicaid, the single largest expense of local governments, and for caps on spending in the state. I call this a budget for the decade, and I meant precisely that. Fully enacted, along with GAAP, which we've strongly advocated, modern accounting system, and for our programs of capital redevelopment, it would consolidate the state's progress since 1975, representing a permanent break with the policies that first brought this state into trouble and provide a clear and coherent direction for future development. Obviously, such a program requires comprehensive and deliberate consideration by the legislature, a process that must result in some give and take on both sides. But instead, there has been, I'm afraid, a hesitation to confront the necessity of long-term action and long-range planning and extended development downrange. Yet, as I've said at the outset, I'm an optimist, and seeing the glass half full and seeing us more than halfway up the hill, well up the ladder, that convinces me that with a dedicated nonpartisanship, the kind of evidence so clearly available to us about what happened in the fiscal crisis of 1975, we can get the job done. I'm sure your memories record how difficult it was in 1975 and through 1976, how much you had to bear the burden at the time of near insolvency in New York City. State agencies that couldn't borrow, couldn't build, affected all of us. We've come a long way from that. That's reason enough for us to sustain the optimism I feel. Today, as we look to the federal government, the policies of the administration in Washington make the decisions I'm talking about all the more imperative. Sweeping federal cuts in social welfare, housing, energy conservation, transportation, all programs of particular importance to us in New York, will mean we must develop a heightened sense of cooperation and a renewed commitment to fiscal discipline among ourselves. Most importantly, we can no longer afford a piecemeal approach to the state's problems, patching up our water and transportation systems rather than rebuilding them, postponing the day of decision on real property fair assessment. And I have reiterated that the details of our programs are...
Mayor of the village of Silver Creek. Our village is 3,200 in population. Every resident drinks turbid water and wears brown t-shirts. The state has mandated us to do something with our water system. Mandate
those in Nassau County, namely Wilson Park. I would like to ask if you intend restoring state aid back to the formula that it was prior to your cutting. When President...
The answer is no.
Sir, please...
The answer is no.
Okay. When President Reagan announced his budget cuts, you said that by he cutting the budget, it will be transferred back to the residents of the state of New York, and sir, by you cutting our state aid, you transfer it back to the people in the villages. In my capacity as president of the Nassau County...
Wait, before you go any further...
Sir, wait a minute, please. May I have the courtesy? We will do everything in our power to try to get you to restore the state aid back to our villages. We think you're discriminatory in your thinking. You cut it back to 16%, when it was 18%, and it should be up to 22% and shared equally by all in the state of New York. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Mayor, do you want the answer? First of all, it's not 16%, it's 8% of our total revenue.
Yes,
Your
but I
figures are
think
wrong.
8% goes to the cities and 8% is shared by the...
It's 8%
Yes.
of our total revenue. You share all of our revenue, not just income tax. Sharing income tax with income tax reduction, you well could have been on the decline. So you share everything we get, number one. Number two, I've said to the people of the state, as I went around the state and held forums all over, including Long Island, not far from where you are located, Mineola, Hapa, easy to come to those forums. You may have been there. If you weren't, sorry you weren't. I asked the question again and again. Do you want more aid, general aid to governments who may need it and those who don't, or do you want targeted aid to those governments that definitely can prove their needs? The answer was overwhelming by the people. We want the targeted aid. And what I did was cap the aid. Cap the aid. But you have a county executive, Mr. Purcell, who's joined me in asking for the real property takeover, the largest way in which we can lift burdens from the county. And part of that county aid and property takeover, Medicaid pickup, is designed to give more money through the county to you. Now your taxpayers get relief that way. You share more of the benefits of the relief to the counties, and that becomes permanent. As far as general aid to governments, I've been fair with you. I've said from the beginning, I'm going to cap it at $800 million. Well, capping at $800 million, we've picked up in terms of sharing the courts, local cost of Medicaid, local cost of the SSI. We have picked up $800 million of costs that used to be borne locally. So when you're talking about being capped at the local level, look at the benefits that have come from the state.
Sir, we lost $30,000 in this last year because of your cap. We are a very small village. We are 95% residential. This is where our funds come from. And we feel that you're asking for cooperation. The only way to cooperate between the two agencies is give us the money that we deserve. Thank you.
I'll give you what you deserve. It'll be as much as last year, and that's what you get. We have to live at less than last year. You can do the same thing. By the way, Mr. Mayor, where do you stand on the targeted special aid of $79 million and $29 million, which I spoke about while I was making my address here? Do you support that?
No comment.
I can't get along saying no comment. How about you?
Governor, I feel like saying more of the same, but you said in your address that we have to listen to each other. We were at the
You
Yonkers...
haven't identified where you're from, please.
I was just going to do that. We were at the Yonkers hearing. I represent the villages in Westchester with a combined population of 200,000. I myself am from the village of Dobbs Ferry, 10,000. When you speak about targeted aid, I think it's a matter of definition. How targeted? The cities, it is true, need aid. They are in trouble. However, the cities are partly in trouble because they have constitutional tax limits combining general municipal services and education into one limit, and they're up against their tax limits, and they cannot raise money any more by property taxation. Villages have a higher tax limit, and education is not in there. We are not up to our